Hey everyone, my name is Jonathan Núñez. I'm a physical therapist, and today we're going to talk about how we can use a microgravity treadmill to help with our Achilles repairs. So let's get right to it. This is the Achilles Repair Microgravity Rehab Playbook. This is a presentation that is part of an ongoing educational seminars that we're giving in the Puerto Rico Sports Performance Summit, and this one specifically is in partnership with Boost Treadmill. So Boost Treadmill, we appreciate your support, and let's get right to it. First, we have to talk about how do we use the treadmill. So these treadmills, you need to have some specialized shorts that you're going to put around your waist, and this is going to zip into the machine. And with that, we'll explain a little bit further. Keep in mind, these all come in different shapes and sizes, so you can have a variety of patients that can use this machine. And a quick parentheses over here, or not going on a tangent, but you can use this machine for multiple things. It's not only for surgeries like ACLs and Achilles repair. I've used this machine for people with low back pain. I've used this machine with people with cardiovascular conditions like PODS. Like they cannot do a lot of exercise online, and all of a sudden you put them in this microgravity environment, and they can walk for an extended period of time. And while you watch this, I just want to let you know that this is a lower body positive pressure system that creates a pressurized chamber around your lower body, generating upward force that reduces your body weight. And then you can adjust this from anywhere from 20, let's go back and look at it again, from 100% to 20% of body weight with calibrated air pressure. And one of the important things is that the shorts need to be at a specific height, so it needs to match the patient's height in order for us to get a benefit from this. Because if not, the ground reaction forces can be more than what we're actually anticipating. And then once you're there, you're going to hit all the settings, it's going to go down, and then the pressure is going to start building, and the bag is going to start inflating. Your heel should come up a little bit if it is working correctly, and it's the appropriate height. So now that we know how the microgravity treadmill works, let's talk about Achilles tendon. And before we even get into that, I just want to say that I've used multiple microgravity treadmills, and Boost is my favorite one by far. There's other ones, and they have a lot of metrics and the camera and all that. Most of those things you don't need. So if you're looking for something that's efficient, that is cost effective for the clinic, then I think Boost is the better bang for your buck. So before we even get into talking about the Achilles, we need to talk about the research. There's not a lot of research out there. We need way more research. When you do a basic PubMed search and you search Achilles surgeries versus ACL surgeries, you'll get way different results. And this means that a lot of the things that we may talk about today are not necessarily strictly systematic reviews that we have. Is like we have some of these numbers from either testing athletes, testing the general population. Some of them are research studies. Some of them might be more empirical or things that I've seen in different institutions that I've been a part of. And yeah, just making that quick parentheses or making that quick statement before we get into talking about all of these things. I work in an outpatient sports medicine environment, and I see anywhere from an 8-year-old to a 93-year-old. So I see a lot of people, and people have different goals. If you're in a professional sports environment, if you're in a collegiate sports environment, if you're seeing high level athletes, these things might be a little bit different. But we're going to try and apply all those numbers and metrics that we have from athletes, and we're going to try and apply that to the general population, and vice versa. Oh, know your patient, know your athlete. If you have someone like Aaron Rodgers and they tore their Achilles, you're gonna rehab them a little bit different than if it was Josh Allen. They're different playing styles, right? Like one needs that explosiveness, one doesn't maybe need that explosiveness. If you're treating a 40-year-old that wants to return to maybe jogging and running for a half marathon or something like that, or maybe playing some pickleball, then there's some of the things that we are not necessarily going to go too much in depth, right? Because a professional athlete is going to be way different than someone that wants to return to their general activities of daily living, and they just want to have, a healthy Achilles, try not to rupture that Achilles, and so on. I won't go too much in depth in terms of the anatomy of the Achilles tendon, but I will point you to the yellow letters that are here that says in terms of function, the Achilles can tolerate up to 2 to 3 times the body weight of the person when walking, and the internal forces of this Achilles can be 8 to 12.5 times the body weight with activities such as running. So now we have kind of like some numbers that we can play with, right? Because those are the numbers that we kind of want to get this Achilles healthy enough to be able to tolerate these things. Tendon elongation is something that we can talk for hours and hours and hours. Just know that when it comes to athletes, this is extremely important. If you're treating a high level athlete and that tendon becomes elongated, once the and I took this shout out to Dr. Scott Greenberg from the University of Florida, and if the toothpaste comes out of the tube, you can't put it back in. So once that tendon becomes elongated, it's not going to go back to what it was before. Okay? So for high level athletes, this is extremely important. When it comes to the general population, tendon elongation may not be something that is extremely important. It's still important, but it's not something that if it happens, it's going to damage our rehab, or like this person's not going to be able to, they're still going to be able to run. They're still going to be able to do even activities like potentially playing basketball, but the amount of force that they can produce won't be the same. Will this matter for a general population? Not necessarily. Will this matter for professional athletes? Yes, it will. I just wanted to take some time to talk about tendon elongation before we go into like the actual protocol and all these things, because it's really important. If you don't if it's one of the most important things about this rehab process. If you don't understand tendon elongation, then you won't be able to like understand why we have all these metrics and things that we're going to talk about. Also keep in mind that because all these accelerator rehab protocols have people walking a little bit earlier, that is good in terms of like let's load that Achilles. But if we remove, once you have an Achilles surgery, you have a boot, right? From the boot with some heel wedges, you go to a shoe with some heel wedges. So some people take those out pretty soon, and then makes that tendon become elongated. That tendon becomes elongated. It's like think about having an old rubber band that's just not, that elasticity is not there. So think about that. That elasticity is not there. And I've seen some of these tendons in the clinic where when you put them into dorsiflexion after a few months after they had their Achilles repair, it just feels like very very flimsy. Like that dorsiflexion, like they can go into dorsiflexion so easy, and then that reduces the ability to produce force, and that reduces the ability of us being able to, if it was an athlete, go back into high level sports the same way that we were before we had the injury. When it comes to the general population, again, like this matters, but if it happens, is not the end of the world. So now we start the fun part. We needed to cover all that, but now it's the fun part. When are we ready to run? Here's a very general protocol of how that Achilles repair is going to go. And then these phases may vary depending on the institution, the patient, the type of surgery that they had. There's different types of surgeries that you can have for the Achilles repair. But the general consensus is that you should not be running before the 12-week mark. However, I want to. We have some numbers over here, but we should base our rehab on criteria, not necessarily the amount of time that the patient has. Because if the patient just sat at home and didn't do anything for 12 weeks, 16 weeks, that doesn't mean that they're ready to run just because they're around the 16-week mark. Okay, so we're going to talk about more of criteria. What things can we do? What things can we measure before they can, walk without the boot? They can run on the microgravity treadmill. They can get off the microgravity treadmill and things like that. So we know that from cadaver studies that the Achilles repair can take up to 18 to 110 pounds of force right after surgery. When walking, the Achilles tolerates from 2 to 3 times the body weight, and when running, 8 to 12.5 times the body weight. Quick statement over here. When you have the Achilles repair, if you have someone that has an Achilles repair on the right side, that affects their driving. So they can't drive, and the patient's going to ask you, when can I drive again? and you can measure the amount of force that they can produce and tell them that they can drive again. So driving, when braking, the amount of force that you need is between 60 to 90 pounds. So you can measure that force coming out of surgery. Let's say it could be 3-4 weeks after surgery. It can be 5-6 weeks depending on the patient and if they had any complications from the surgery. But you can actually measure these things, and we know that after the repair, it can take an average of 50 to 60 pounds of force. So they should be able to produce that amount of force without, causing a re-tear or anything. And also a quick statement is that the re-tear rates for these surgeries are actually pretty low. They're not really high, so we're not worrying a whole lot about them re-tearing their Achilles. Obviously, we're not gonna start jumping at the 3 week mark, but you get what I mean. Okay, so now we're gonna actually talk about testing. What tests can we do? How can we measure the strength? But keep in mind that depending on how you do the test, so like, are you doing the test with shoes? Are you doing the test without shoes? Are you doing the test are they warming up a whole lot before they do the test? Are you doing the test after a session, a full physical therapy session? Are you doing the test every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks? All these things matter. So as an institution, you should have, like, everybody should be on the same page of, like, this is why we're doing this is when we're doing this, and this is how we're going to do this. So let's talk about this test real quick. The seated plantar flexion isometric test. 1. You see that I'm using some force plates. If you don't have force plates, you can use a handheld dynamometer. It's just going to be a little bit different. The numbers are not going to be the same, so we can't use these numbers. And there's not a lot of research out there in terms of the numbers that we can get out of surgery before we return to walking without the boot. Okay? So the force plates are really good when you have an Achilles repair. Fact number 2, I am wearing Brooks over there. So that adds a little bit of height to my already wedge that I'm using there. That's 1 inch between those two. I think those are 2.5 pound plates. And 3, this is how I do the test in my clinic. You might find that some clinics do it a different way, but this is how I do the test in my clinic with a squat rack, and I'm using the barbell, and then with that barbell, I'm pushing off against an immovable object, and then I'm getting a number with the force plate. So now we talked about the test. What are the numbers that we need for the test? First, we can start measuring this test at about 4 to 6 weeks after surgery, depends on the patient, and they just don't put them into dorsiflexion or neutral because they can't go into that right around this phase of surgery because we do not want to cause any tendon elongation. You can use this for training, by the way. You can train them in this position, and they can do a lot of repetition sets and repetitions of holding this for about 10 seconds, 20 seconds, even more if you want to. I'll leave that up to you. But before we remove the boot, before we decide, like, hey, like, you're not wearing the boot anymore, we're going to walk with a shoe with some wedges first, then we should aim for 1 time the patient's body weight in this seated plantar flexion isometric test. The numbers and research may be a little bit different in some researchers. This is what the numbers that I'm looking at based on the institutions that I've been a part of. Sometimes the patients cannot get these numbers. These numbers, athletes can get these numbers a little bit easier than the general population. So keep that in mind when you're making the decision. So if the patients just made 0.7 their body weight, are they going to be able to return to walking without the boot? Are you going to wait? Those are decisions that you make as a clinic and as a team. After removing the boot, we can start loading that Achilles in different ways. We can start doing a few more things with thinking in mind that we don't want to elongate that tendon, right? So here are some exercises that I would do in the microgravity treadmill. Pretty easy. We start with double leg calf raises, then we can do into a double leg calf raise, lowering down with the affected side. One of the other things that we can do is a single leg calf raise. You can control the body weight. So that's a cool thing about this, because we can start at, like, let's say 50% of the patient's body weight and go up to 60, to 70, to 80. And then the prescription, I'll leave this to y'all. and you can decide based on where the patient's at, the goals that you have for the patient, and what you see from their function out of the microgravity treadmill. Other exercises that we can do before running are pogos. Again, increasing the body weight over there. And then you can do them single leg. And first we do double leg, and then we go to single leg around the appropriate time of rehab. Before running, we're going to use the same test that we were using, the seated plantar flexion isometric test. From there, we have some numbers. We want to achieve 1.4 body weight in the seated plantar flexion isometric before running. We can do this in neutral, which you see over here. In that other test, I was in plantar flexion. Now we can go into neutral based on the phase of the rehab that we're in. Well, some numbers might say 1.5 body weight before running. Some numbers might say 1.5 to 2.0 body weight before running. Keep that in mind. When it comes to athletes, you probably want to have a little bit more. When it comes to the general population, a 1.4 body weight in the seated plantar flexion isometric might be a safe bet. When it comes to more explosive movements, then we do want to have more strength in that Achilles, and we want 1.8 to 2.0 body weight. Keep in mind, this number comes from a research from rugby players, so your general population may not get to these numbers, okay? These were professional rugby players or collegiate rugby players. I'm not remembering right now, but that number might look different. That number might look different in some athletes depending on the sport that they do. So when looking at this, when we first started this presentation, we talked about the research. There's more that we need to do. So one of the things that we need to do is how do we have a better criteria of rehab? But these numbers are very safe bets. Just know that your numbers of your specific patient, of your specific athlete might be lower, or you may be aiming for something a little bit higher. And we run. Now we know all the things that we need to be able to do to run on the microgravity treadmill. I wanted to leave the noise because that's what you're going to hear in the clinic. Here is a protocol that we can use. It has some of the numbers that we talked about. It's really easy to go off of these, from the protected loading to the microgravity treadmill walking. And after we walked on the microgravity treadmill and the patient tolerates walking for 10 to 15 minutes with good mechanics, then they can go to walking on land. After they have the good mechanics, you can also build some gait training over here. In this phase, that's the orange face that you see over there. And after they walk on land, then we talk about how we can go into microgravity treadmill running. And after they meet certain criteria over there, like with running 15 to 25 minutes on the microgravity treadmill with good mechanics at 85% body weight, then we can go to running on land. So we have a very systematic approach of how we're going to approach this rehab using the microgravity treadmill. I broke it down over here into the two different phases, which would be the walking with the boot, to walking then microgravity treadmill, to then walking on land without the boot. And it may be necessary for your patient to wear the boot outside of physical therapy, but in physical therapy, you're doing some things to try and challenge that tendon a little bit, and then they wear the boot coming out of the clinic, and so on until you make the decision to discharge them from the boot, or you'd make that as a team with the surgeon. And lastly, then over here is when we talk more about running. And the initiation of running is typically started around the 12 to 16 weeks after surgery, but using microgravity treadmill can allow for earlier introduction at a reduced body weight. Will you start this before the 12-week mark? It depends. It depends on the patient. It depends on the metrics that we're getting. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I hope this brings a bit of a clearer picture of how you can progress and use a microgravity treadmill. My name is Jonathan Núñez, and it was a pleasure doing this presentation with Boost Treadmill.